Hello, this is Alex. Yes, it's going to be stuff to do with Apple's Final Cut Pro 10 software. Did this on Monday, seemed to work okay, kind of made it up as I went along, and now a little bit more organised? I don't know. Yes, so now what you should not be doing is updating your phone to iOS 8.3. And you shouldn't be updating your computer to, well, your Mac to OS 10 10.0.3 because let other people test it. And then we'll see in the next few hours how that goes. Although, of course, some people think that the reason why Final Cut Pro 10 has been delayed is because it needed something in OS 10.0.3, but we'll see. So yeah, here's the Final Cut Pro 10 stuff. So Apple's editing software is called Final Cut Pro 10, and I tweet and blog about it. Don't blog very often about it, but sometimes I do. And it's quicker for me to talk here than it is to write stuff out and actually write properly. So yeah, Rabbit. Oh yes, wearing my red T-shirt like I have my avatar, which is part of my branding, and I had to style my hair and prepare myself properly, and my team are off camera at the moment. So yeah, so 10.0.3. Yeah, the point from let's see what it says. Hyperpause is the service is more reliable on Meerkat than it is, sorry, on Periscope than it is on Meerkat. I think on Meerkat it looks better because they're using a higher load of bandwidth and they're encoding it less and they're spending less time on the device doing the encoding, and they're sending a fatter stream to everybody. But that means when the signal is bad, it's not as good, and that means there's problems with signals and stuff like that. Signals, Meerkat's much more sensitive to signals, but it's better quality. It's just a pure guess. It's just what I think. So yeah, Final Cut Pro 10. What's happened the last 2 days? Well, what can I say? There's been an update to SliceX and TrackX from CoreMelt, which is a really good set of plugins for doing stuff which uses a tracking software. So CoreMelt is a company that does high-end things called Mocha and stuff like that, which you can get as well. But they've licensed some of their tracking technology to CoreMelt in Australia. And Mr. Bolton there has made plugins that means you can track stuff within Final Cut Pro 10. That's been around for a couple of years, I think. And I must admit, when I first got SliceX, I kind of looked at it, played with it a bit, and didn't quite get it. But then when TrackX came along, and that was much easier, you know, making it so a piece of text follows something on screen. So if I did this, left and right, then a bit of text would follow automatically, say, pointing to my glasses or something like that, which is the cool, trendy thing at the moment in videos, to look like you've done a lot of work, but really, hopefully, you've just known how to use tracking software. Well, there's an update to TrackX and SliceX, the bundle, and it's free for people who've already got it. And what's cool about it is that it's much faster and better on longer things. And also they've added a couple of easier to use plugins to make it so just to solve specific problems. And one of the problems I like is it solves the problem of somebody moving around too much in shot. Say, for example, again, if I move to the left and right, you can make it so a person or a thing, however much it moves in the frame, gets locked in the same place, which is quite handy when you're doing kind of conference work or long shots, and you don't want to have to spend lots of time slowly moving the shot to allow for a person moving in and out of frame, say you've cropped an image or something like that. So there's a thing for locking people in place, which I like. And also to track parts of the frame and make something glow. Say, for example, I could have a pen, and it could follow the shape of the pen and make it glow, and I wouldn't have to do anything, and I can make it glow, or I can make it sharpen or something like that. So that's pretty cool. So check out the TrackX SliceX with Mocha bundle from CoreMelt. I'll put a link into the YouTube version of this. Yeah, so but it's great value, and what's really cool is that you don't have to use external software to do it, which used to be really cool in Final Cut Pro 10. It was pretty distinctive, and then possibly inspired by this, who knows, Premiere last year, or since TrackX came out, Premiere now does tracking, and almost nearly all effects can be tracked, which is really cool, and masking, stuff like that. So that's really cool. So it's good that there's a bit of competition. So yes, say for example, any effect you can think of, like blurring or sharpening or glowing or doing anything, you can have a mask, and also that can track an object in Premiere. So maybe there'll be something like that in Final Cut Pro. So the question is, am I filming the YouTube version of this at the same time? Well, my plan was to plug this phone into this computer off camera and have a lightning cable and just start recording on the computer. So that means I was recording it at the same time, and that means that little bubbles would come up, and the little number here that says how many followers there are would be shown, and that would be because I'm not using special. I wouldn't be using special getting around Periscope problems things. I'll be just using the fact that Yosemite and the new version of iOS, if you plug the phone into a Mac running Yosemite and run QuickTime Player 10, you can set it so it'll just record whatever the iPhone is doing, including the audio, which is pretty cool. Didn't work. I was trying to do it this morning actually, to record a Periscope thing that was happening this morning. So BAFTA, which is sadly every British person has to say, which is the equivalent of the Academy, the American Academy Awards, those things. Our equivalent is called the BAFTAs, which is the British Academy of Film and Television Arts. And this morning they announced the nominations for the Television Awards, which are happening May 10th or something like that. And they announced it, their kind of big central London place at 7:35 in the morning for some reason. And the idea was, cool, announcements. But usually that kind of announcement recently has been streamed on the internet. So, oh yeah, you can watch the announcements being streamed onto the internet live. That's really cool. But this morning they didn't stream it on the internet or a website for some reason. They just thought, I guess what I'm picturing is that somebody said, okay, so how much is the camera going to cost, and the wiring up and the operator and the streaming service and checking it all out and doing the website and putting the stream in, so we've got the 10-15 minutes of the announcements of the nominations like they do in the States, or like we've done before. And somebody must have said, well, I don't know, £8,000 or £9,000 or £10,000 or some like large number. And I imagine the person said, I don't know if it's really a good idea. Maybe we should use that new thing, that Periscope thing or Meerkat, whatever this thing people going on about. So they did use Periscope. What they did is they set up at about 5 minutes before the thing was due to start. They got a phone like this, and they set it up pointing at the stage, and they did the announcement. This kind of august TV and film organization had their official stream was done by Periscope using a phone. There were problems with it. The audio from the PA wasn't connected into the phone, so the audio quality was terrible because the people in the distance, 25 feet that way, they're rather far away from this microphone here. So the audio wasn't any good. And so that means the levels is pretty quiet. So the applause was quite loud from the people around the phone, and then it was really quiet from the people speaking. And also the framing wasn't great because it's vertical. But it looks like they made the right decision because it got, I don't know how many people were watching it live, but it got the actual playback on Periscope of that stream got about 130 views or 85 views, not very many views. And I did a YouTube version of it, of the stream, and then put it on YouTube, and I thought that maybe people would want to see it. But I realized, why would you want to see the announcements of nominations, people saying stuff that you can get more detail of, or just things on Twitter or web pages where there's more detail? So it turns out that maybe we're past peak website streaming, that some things don't need to be streamed if they've got the right information. Anyway, not very Final Cut Pro 10-y, but it's more kind of Periscope-y, so for what it's worth. So 10.0.3, let other people test it. So the question is, do I have a recommendation for screen capture software YouTube channel? I don't know. I mean, QuickTime Player on the Mac will actually record the screen. I use that thing, what's it called? I never remember the name of the application, but it's the ScreenFlow. ScreenFlow? Anyway, that's what I use because the advantage is that it doesn't, when it's recording stuff, it's not recording every single pixel that's going on the screen. It's recording every movement, every change to the screen, or everything that the computer is doing to modify the screen, which means that the file sizes are a lot smaller, and then you can convert them to whatever format you want afterwards and change the picture quality later and stuff like that. So, so I have to look more closely because I can't quite see that. Talibard says, I've been using 10.10.3 for weeks on beta and it's been fine. So my question is, what is my YouTube channel? I have some videos that I've uploaded. I'm known as HC Beck on the YouTube. So if I see this map up here, that's a map from the 1930s designed by a guy whose initials are HC Beck, who designed the original on the London Underground, I'm not looking the right way, London Underground map. So that's my ID on YouTube. So my videos are there, which includes various stuff, HC Beck. But maybe if you look for Alex Gollner on YouTube, you'll find them. ALEXGOLLNER. And there's kind of demos of plugins and a few Final Cut Pro 10 related stuff on there. But I don't usually make that many videos. So 2 a week in this case is not like me. But yeah, what else? I just got some notes here. I suppose I was just kind of tweeting over the last few days. The question is predictions for the next Final Cut Pro 10 release. I have no idea. I mean, the thing is that Apple is a bit schizophrenic. What it comes down to is that they want tools, and they like the idea of tools that will help people change the world, to actually really make videos or edit videos that really matter to them in a deep sort of way, either to, I don't know, prevent their school being knocked down, or save some animal, changing big changes things, or making people feel happy and stuff like that. And I think that's one part of Apple. One could say the consumer products part of it. And then the other part is people who hopefully want to change their own lives by becoming video professionals. But the thing is that Apple don't seem to have the right model for video professionals, at least for support. Because what happens is, say for example, I wanted to set up a business that helps support people to create feature films using Final Cut Pro and Apple products and stuff like that. I'd have to charge by the day, and have a charge by a contract. I couldn't make the money in the old way, which is to get the Macs cheap, because Apple don't sell stuff the Macs to people cheap anymore, and these dealers there's hardly any margin in them because there's the Apple Store, and also Final Cut Pro 10 is available from the App Store, and there's no reduced price for dealers, and all the other quite a lot of the software one uses for Final Cut Pro 10 type post-production is on the App Store. So there's no. It's not expensive enough really for people to have a business. I mean, say I wanted to go to the bank and said, okay, I need a loan to rent some place in the centre of town and get some staff to look after it and to do the decoration and stuff like that. And here's how much I'll be able to make out of every single client. When they then they're able to call me 24 hours a day to say they've got a problem with their workflow or something like that. Yeah, I mean, Avid have really got that model sorted. They fit into the economic model of the people who currently look after people in high-end post-production, TV, high-end TV and feature films. That's what they're kind of set up to do. It's a bit like, you could say that the world of advertising and high-end TV and stuff like that, especially advertising, is it's a bit like the banking system in mid-2008. Everybody knows lots of money, lots of markup is being marked up at various stages for no particularly good reason, but everyone just knows that, well, we'll add 5% here, then the people above us will add 5%, these will add 10% and stuff like that. And the idea is that the eventual client, which is like the people who sell cars or soap or something like that, they just assume, well, TV commercials cost £25,000, £100,000, £150,000 to make. That's just what they cost. But eventually, the dirty little secret out about how much they actually cost if you take all those margins away for not adding that much value, then suddenly all those bits of expensive kit that people have brought, like high-end computers that do color correction only, like a high-end computer that does color correction maybe 50% faster, that costs something that cost only £1,000. But the company bought that high-end computer and all that software 4 or 5 years ago, and they're still paying for it, and they still want the margin, and everyone thinks, hey, this is really luxurious. I'm using a Pablo, or I'm using whatever the bit of whatever toy it is that they want to mark up. So they may become a reckoning when enough people in marketing discover and PR and advertising discover how much all this stuff really costs, and they may just go around people who have got these expensive setups. I mean, there's a facilities house or post-production place in central London called Nice Biscuits. In other words, you go there because they've got nice biscuits, and it's a somewhat satirical name, because the idea is, oh wow, we're paying all this extra money, hundreds of pounds per day for all these people because they actually give us a nice biscuits there while we're watching the stuff on the screen. Whereas, of course, most people know the difference between difference between online and offline is there really, which counts, especially these days with Resolve and Final Cut Pro 10 and the Adobe Suite and stuff like that. I mean, I really get into Color Finale, which is a plugin from Denver Riddle, and there's which is a plugin that adds a good load of color palettes on top of Final Cut Pro 10. I find myself just turning to it and doing really simple things in it really quickly, and it's like a no-brainer. I kind of think that would have been a round trip to Resolve, and I haven't really bothered to do that very much. And I know the scary thing is that part of editing quickly or working well with clients is knowing what they won't notice, and not necessarily spending too much time that's to do with your own ego, and do spend most of your time that they're paying for on stuff that they will notice the difference of. And sadly, colour, they don't notice very much, especially if you're doing safe day edits. But so yes, somebody says, I want round tripping to motion. Well, my guess about the thing about somebody asking for round tripping to motion, that'd be fantastic. I'd like to be able to have the various layers and all move into. But the funny thing is, I think Apple may be even preventing it round tripping to motion because they don't want people to just use Final Cut Pro 10 with layers, because everything will just be a big long motion thing. Anyway, it's just a kind of possible thing because motion has got layers in it, or tracks, I should say. I always call them layers, but they're tracks. So you're effectively doing track-based editing when you're in motion. You could be. So maybe they really want to have sold the idea of how to let people let go of tracks, because there are tracks in motion up to a point. So it's a way around that. That's one part of it. I really like that. But the thing is that it's tempting to say, on the one hand, I said I like to have color palettes in Final Cut Pro 10, and it's really quick. So I just made the color better because it's actually quicker to do it than not bothering to do it at all, because I didn't want to spend the time going over to Resolve and back. But on the other hand, people choose to be editors, and they choose not necessarily to be motion graphics designers. And motion graphics designers don't necessarily know that much about editing. Just like videographers, there's two kinds of videographers. There's camera people who have to work with this terrible editor themselves, or they're editors who have to work with terrible camera people themselves. In other words, I've always been an editor that has to work with this terrible cameraman, me. So people who edit didn't choose to shoot necessarily. Now, of course, you got these one-man or one-person bands who do everything and are totally comfortable with doing it all, and they like the idea of having, shot, edited, written, produced, acted in by X. But I like the collaborative thing. I actually want to stick to what I want to do, and I leave it up to other talented people to do what they do, which means, say, sound people, different kinds of sound people, color people, stuff like that. Because the thing about the producer or the director sitting next to you when you're editing away as an editor is that you want the editor to sort that problem out. To say, can't you just sort out the sound? You're so close to it. You're getting the sound almost right, or the sound design, or the music, or the motion graphics, or all that kind of stuff. And they essentially don't want to have to wait. They just think, hey, wow, they've got it 80% of the way there. If we just give them a push, they'll get it all the way there. And they don't really appreciate what sound people do, or sound editors do, or sound designers do, or mixers do. And it's a whole load of skill that the more you know how to edit, the more you realize how these other people are really good at doing what they do. Instead, it's very tempting to say, I want all features of all post-production software in one app. But I don't really. I want to be able to work with other people really easily so that their features are really good at and their metaphor works. And an example of that would be to have Logic or Reaper or Pro Tools to be able to edit and do audio on a Final Cut Pro 10 timeline while I'm editing the Final Cut Pro 10 timeline. That's what I want. So I can edit it away and they can do the sound, which is asking a lot. And of course, if you're fiddling away as an audio person and somebody keeps on moving the clip around, then you're going to get a bit knocked off. But there is a very interesting tool called Audio, which you may have seen me tweet about. So Audio is a translation tool that translates video timelines to work in the digital audio workstation called Reaper. So Reaper is another digital audio workstation, I think of the order of £400 or £500, I don't know, or dollars, something like that. But it's very scriptable, very modifiable by third parties. It's a bit like Final Cut Pro 7 in terms of it's got a scripting language in it that allows you to do cool things. So Audio is a tool that takes NLE timelines and takes the audio and sets up all the a new project, an audio project in Reaper, audio editing software, or digital audio workstation. But the clever bit is it doesn't lay out the tracks to copy what it is in the NLE. It just lays things out in a sensible sort of way. For example, so rolls are all together and all the clips associated with rolls in Final Cut Pro 10 are all together, because there's no need for it to be the same. You know, as long as you've got the video in Audio and you've got all the clips in, you've got the video in Reaper and all the clips in Reaper, that's actually okay. It's not really a problem. But then the question is, what happens when you make changes? Well, the cool thing about Audio is that, say I export edit A, which has got bits of audio and also clips with audio, and then the audio editor is working away in Reaper after having converted it in Audio. And they work away. They add their own audio. They don't move any of the video or audio associated with the video because that's the editor's job. But they add lots of effects to clips and stuff like that. But Audio's got this amazing reconform feature, which means that, say I change the edit, I move a clip left or right, or delete a clip or add a clip. What happens is when I export the timeline again, and it's converted using Audio, and then re-imported into Reaper, the audio conversion tool colors the various clips to show this audio has been moved, this is new audio, the audio, and also the audio you've already got that you thought you were going to use is actually being deleted by the editor. So what this is a way for the editor and the audio person to communicate. So they are actually communicating through color. So instead of having to write a change list or having to explain to the editor, to the audio person what you've done, they can just see what's moved and they can see what's staying the same, and they can play it through, and magically then they can associate a specific sound, like in Final Cut Pro 10, with another clip. So say I've got an audio clip and I do clap or something like that, and the audio person has made it so a bell goes off when I clap my hands, but I move that audio clip later or early in the timeline. Using Reaper and Audio, you can make it so that even though I've moved the clip further back in the timeline, the bell going off is still in sync with the hand clap. So it's pretty clever. So I think it hasn't really been necessary until relatively recently, because the idea, in theory, there was such a thing as picture lock. But the nature of people changing their minds and people not really looking the edit until it's too late, or what used to be too late, and then having to do it again, or people changing their minds, or maybe standards and practices suddenly saying, no, actually we can't have that joke, or various things needing to be changed. There's picture lock, or maybe there's picture latch, because picture lock was the idea, was we're not going to edit this again. You can safely go, and one timeline is going to go off to the color people, and the other timeline is going to go to the audio people, and everything's going to be put together in the online. But that doesn't happen much anymore. People like to say it does. I mean, because I like to say it for people who don't have a technological solution to it. They say, oh yeah, picture lock is reliable. You can bet your life on it. But no, not these days. But I like the idea of collaborating with people on a timeline, so there's a way to communicate with them without having to tell them everything and while you're making the changes. And I think Audio and Reaper is pretty cool. The thing about Logic is that it doesn't seem to me, because of its history, because it, created by some cool German folks, more than 10 years ago, to be Pro Tools, but what if we design Pro Tools in 2004 as opposed to in whenever they designed Pro Tools, 1991? What if we designed a modern Pro Tools? What would it have in it? What wouldn't it have in it? And I'm guessing that's what Logic Pro, whatever Logic was called in those days was. I don't know. I don't follow the history of it. So that was a German company that was bought by Apple. So they're really a composing tool for producing albums. So albums that you've heard of are produced in Logic, whereas Pro Tools is new people come and use our software. We're going to keep on new groups of people for different reasons they come to use our software, and when they ask for features, we'll add them and we'll squeeze them in wherever we can. And if you've ever used Pro Tools, I did a short course in it to check it out, and yeah, the UI, once you're told where things are, is fine, but you have to be told. It's not really discoverable. The structure of where things are probably ran out of space, no logical place to put it more than 10 years ago. But if you know how to use it, that doesn't matter. And then when new features come in, you just learn the new features as they come in, which just happens for older software. That's why Photoshop is pretty cool, because in theory, it's not too bad to learn Photoshop, and all the complexity is hidden until you need it. Maybe less so with track-based editors like Premiere. I don't know, because Premiere probably looks quite daunting to folk who never used it before. Sorry, I haven't been actually responding to any of your comments. I've just been going off on a sermon for a while. Yeah, so I think Audio Reaper... I like the idea of Apple just saying, okay, Soundtrack Pro 10, a new version of audio production tool specifically for post-production. It's designed for post-production. It isn't designed for composing audio. It doesn't have the concepts of beats and measures and stuff like that. It's not necessary for doing audio for post, and much more to do with sound design and understanding the different nature of sound design and sound for post-production, which is different. And especially a cut-down version that will allow people to do it who have got an equivalent to work with iMovie. Because I don't think adding the features to iMovie, I don't know. Maybe adding some features to iMovie would be quite good. Obviously things like compressors are quite cool. But if Apple are in the business of supporting people who are making YouTube videos, who have got millions of viewers, or they're journalists who have been asked to make a video even though they're really good at writing, for people like BuzzFeed, and they're getting lots of kind of text-based viral stories, but they'll suddenly say, oh, grab some footage and do an edit, and we need it in a couple of hours. And I think Apple want to be there, the future of media, future of video literacy. And iMovie / Final Cut Pro 10, which is, as you may know, the same application, I think Apple want to be there with that. Not helping, I'm calling them the 1%. The 1% of people in post who get paid 36 hours a day to do post-production and stuff like that, as opposed to the other 99% of the million or so, or more than a million people who are using Final Cut Pro 10. The funny thing is that there's a verb to Photoshop something. Adobe managed to make working with images so popular that middle-class people... Now, most people know, oh, can't you just Photoshop it? Can't you just Photoshop it? Which means to modify an image, to modify it, to make it look plausibly like something totally different, to change reality of a still. But even though Photoshop is 25 years old, Premiere is not that much younger. And Adobe never managed to make Premiere, or whatever other verb they want to use to Premiere it, to say, okay, make this video look like something else happened. So they had the opportunity to some extent to, they had the ear of the population saying, we do video, we do kind of graphic art stuff. And Premiere didn't. The funny thing is, I think Apple thought they were going to do it, 99 or 2000, whenever it was that they said, okay, we're going to relaunch the Mac OS, and we're going to say it's all based around making video. It's all videos. We're going to produce a new Mac called the iMac DV for digital video, and the new digital video cameras are going to plug in, and we're going to do that. Going to use digital video cameras. It's all going to be based on digital video, and it was a total flop. 6 months later, they suddenly said, "Oh no, rip, mix, burn. Get your CDs, and you can convert them all and have them on your computer, and we're going to buy another bit of software in from somewhere that organizes MP3s, and we're going to rename it as iTunes, and now it's going to be your digital hub. You're not going to create stuff, but the stuff that you find, you're going to be able to have good access to using your Mac, and then eventually your iPod when the iPod came out a couple of years later. So Apple thought that they were going to be able to say the next thing, in the 80s it was, let's make word processing look like a printed book or a magazine, which is desktop publishing. In the 90s it was, let's show pictures and words one after the other and turn a report into a presentation. In other words, slides. Those slides, we're going to make it so that instead of actually writing a report, you just put some slides together and you're going to show them on a screen to people. And I think people thought in the late 90s, early 21st century, people were going to be doing the same with video, that people were going to get normal folk as part of their day-to-day lives. We make videos all the time that will be playing to lots of other people, and that's obviously what the iMac DB was about. But I don't know if Apple in the post-mortem said, I think it's the UI, the tracks, the metaphor for editing is just not easy enough for people to use, and maybe iMovie's in a way in that direction. And it speaks to me as to the fact that Apple want that the UI or the metaphor for editing, which is based around, two tape decks playing in 1989. That's what A/B editing is, source record editing. It's not based on celluloid or anything like that. And that's Avid was obviously based on a couple of tapes, copying everything to tape, and then once we're going to edit these tapes together. So that's still a metaphor for track-based editing. And I think, Randy Ubilos, I don't know how to pronounce his name sadly, back in 2006-07 said, okay, let's make an editing software that uses a metaphor that's designed for editing, video editing, and not actually trying to recreate tape-to-tape editing. So Final Cut Pro tends to do with that, and the problem is, of course, that Apple never really made it that clear what the new metaphor for iMovie was, apart from Randy saying, hey, it's much easier for normal folk to edit. And then when Final Cut Pro 10 came up, the true story probably was, well, we've got Final Cut Server, because we think video should be based around a database that multi-people could use, so it's Final Cut Server we bought in and rebadged. And we've got Motion. That's really cool, because we can composite things almost in real time, and we're doing lots of stuff on the GPU as well as the CPU, because CPUs aren't getting as fast as they used to. The acceleration has slowed down. So the other apps that rely on CPUs, like Avid and to a lesser extent Premiere, they were not. I think they just hoped that CPUs would just get faster and faster throughout from 2000 onwards, and then they weren't. But GPUs were doing okay. So Motion was a really good compositing tool, in other words, for laying one video clip on top of the other, even though it was originally designed for motion graphics. So we've got the database on one side, which is Final Cut Server, and we've got the motion graphics on the other, which is Motion. But what are we going to do to create a kind of hierarchy, a stratification of editing software from iMovie to pro stuff? And I put it that way around because iMovie's up here because this is for millions of people to change their world, and pro stuff, numbers of people using it, 25,000, 100,000 people in the world, maybe 150, 200,000. That's nothing compared with, imagine how many copies of iMovie are going onto iPhones, and every single iPhone's most are going to have iMovie on. Imagine if 5% of those people were playing around with video editing. That's what actually really matters, I would guess, to Apple. So then it's a matter of our world being sexy and interesting enough to use as PR to say, hey, come into the world of editing using Apple technology. Look how Apple technology has been used in the high end. And then you real people, the people that matter, can use similar technology and similar metaphors and tools to change your world. Anyway, a sermon there. I'm going to talk some random other news, things that happened the last couple of days since I had my last video. So there's a new, because it's NAB next week, lots of announcements this week, so we can think about them, and then when we go to NAB in Las Vegas, we can shake somebody's hand. Oh, do you hear about the new? And today, of course, is that Canon are announcing their new 4K video camera, and of course they're announcing a new codec or file format to go with it. So instead of just using one of the ones they've already got or one of the ones that somebody else has got, they've got to have XFAVC, which apparently is really fantastic and quite different from other AVCs or other different kinds of codecs, and it stores in an MXF bundle. So it looks like an MXF file from the point of view of our operating system, but of course it's got its own way of storing the information. That means you've got to get your own drivers and stuff from Canon if you want to use these new cameras, which are coming soon, but are being announced and being shown at NAB in Las Vegas next week. It's a pity how camera manufacturers always think what they're good at is doing codecs, which I don't think they particularly are. But then maybe they are. I mean, the interesting thing is that Arri, who make feature film cameras and, used in lots of TV programs and lots of feature films, I think they just said to Apple, well, we like ProRes, but can you just make it just to capture a little bit more color than it does? So that's what XQ444, ProRes XQ444. I always want to say QX444. Maybe it's because of that TV show QI. Anyway, I think they just said, okay, we want an acquisition format, and we want it to be the best of the best of the best. That's a Men in Black reference. So that's a few months after Apple introduced ProRes 444 QX, XQ, whatever it is. Then Arri say, oh look, our cameras can now do that. I guess Canon don't really have that kind of pull with Apple, and Canon think, well, we can't say this camera captures in ProRes LT because that doesn't sound very good. And even then, the bandwidth of ProRes LT is a bit high for the kind of storage that people are going to be using. So we want it to say we've got the better color science than that, but we want it to take up less space. But I think there's a lot of ego associated with choosing which codec to use, which flavor of codec to use. ProRes LT, that's me. 422 LT for nearly everything LT is fine, because in my opinion the difference in LT and straight ProRes and ProRes 422 better is generation loss. And of course with digital there's only a couple of generation losses. You get it into the computer and after that it's just ones and zeros, and it's all going to be doing quite complicated mathematics, or math as they say in the States, and it doesn't really apply to generation loss. Doesn't really apply. So you can have 10 levels of generation loss in ProRes LT, because this is supposed to compare well with using digibeta tapes or audio not even digibeta, just beta. So generation loss doesn't really apply. So really it's the color science that counts. And of course what I want is ProRes 4224 or 422 Proxy. So 4224 Proxy. In other words, I want to be able to have an alpha channel in relatively low bandwidth video, especially when doing proxies. That would be really useful, because then you could have a proxy workflow which everything was a proxy, all the visual stuff was a proxy, because you could do high-end motion graphics with an alpha channel, and then when you say in Final Cut Pro 10 make a proxy, it will just make the file smaller, but it will still have bits of transparency in it, which means you could still reposition things and change the compositing in Final Cut Pro 10. So I think, anyway, it's been a terrible sermon. I have been only talking a few points to the bubble stuff, because I've just been going bubble stuff. That's what I call the stuff down there. Bubble stuff. I just made that up. Oh, God. Goodness, I should say, for people who care about such things. Yeah, so I got much more to talk about here. But, oh yeah, I had an idea for Final Cut Pro 10, a feature that's not really even a feature you'd see in Final Cut Pro 10, which is, when Apple had a new version of Final Cut, of OS 10 coming out today, 10.0.3, and includes some security updates. And if you click and find the list of security updates, it actually names the people who discovered the bug that needed to be fixed in order to make Final Cut, OS 10 that little bit safe. I think Apple would get a ton load of feedback. Or people would actually just believe in Apple a little bit more if they did something very simple, that when the next version of Final Cut Pro 10 comes out, which is probably, I would guess, is going to be 10.2 for boring reasons, but say 10.2, they actually, so for some of the features and some of the bug fixes, they credit the people who got in touch with them through the Apple's webpage on Apple Final Cut Pro feedback. Imagine if you saw in the update list for Final Cut Pro 10 there was a feature or something like that. Oh look, there's that feature there was chosen by a person that I've actually heard of, or that's a name that I could look up on the internet, or that's a real person who tweeted that or gave the feedback, then they asked for it, and now it's kind of, they can be thanked for suggesting it to Apple. I mean, Apple may have thought of it before, but I just like the idea of that first person suggesting it out there is, is part of the history. Now, of course, some people will say, "Oh, I can make money out of Apple because they've used my idea," but part of the Final Cut Pro feedback page says unsolicited ideas rules for submitting to Apple. If you submit an unsolicited idea through the system, then they're not going to pay you, and you're essentially letting them use the idea for free. So there's that. Sorry, Ray, you asked the question, what were the boring reasons, but I can't even remember what I was talking about. What was I talking about, Ray? Oh my God! Been talking for 40 minutes! I thought I wouldn't have much to talk about, and there's loads of stuff here. So, I don't know if you're still there, Ray. Boring reasons for 10.2. Oh yeah, what are my reasons for thinking it's going to be 10.2? I think Apple are likely to... hello, Jean. I think Apple are likely to be calling the next version of Final Cut Pro 10.2 to show that it's a major version. And the major version could be, for whatever reason it happens to be, to add all the features required so that people could so a new workflow can work together. So a reason to update to 10.2, to give it that name would be shared editing in a 21st century sort of way. Because obviously Avid's shared editing is left over from the 20th century, which is locking bits of your project, so they're read-only and other people can actually, you can't open something that somebody's already opened, but that's about it. And so that's not exactly, things in the world of computers and databases have moved on a lot since the mid-90s, when I imagine they were first working on that. So 10.2 would say shared editing, shared timelines, imagine if somebody's doing a part of a timeline, you say, okay, I'm going to make an audition out of that. Or, I've got a compound clip. No, let's try that again. A storyline. In the storyline, I would say, okay, look, there's somebody else working on that timeline. I'm going to open up that storyline and work on it and make changes to it. And while I make changes to it, as soon as I start opening that storyline, that becomes an audition for that storyline, and it's got my name on it. So somebody else could be working on the original timeline and see their storyline and work away on it. But meanwhile, they'll say, oh, Alex has opened that thing up, and by opening it and making changes, now that's an audition. And he's working on his copy of it. And then at any moment, I can refresh my audition and see what he's done to it. And I can switch between his audition pick, that's what they're called, audition pick, and my audition pick. And to do versioning actually in the timeline using auditions would be quite cool. And you could just choose to refresh to see what changes they've made. And of course, it would be especially cool if I was working on a storyline, a secondary storyline, but the background of the clip is the background of what would be behind that on the primary storyline on somebody else's computer. I think that'd be quite cool. Which means that I could actually get collaborators to work on just sorting out a niggly little problem, like a compositor or something like that, on the timeline while I worked on the master timeline. Or even I could slice up a primary storyline or a secondary storyline, change the order of it, but as long as the actual... Say, for example, a storyline was a character's, a female, a woman's story about going to find strawberries in the forest. Now, from the conceptual point of view, you might as well make that a single story and do an edit that works in and of itself. But that could be a compound clip. And then on the primary storyline, I might want to say, okay, I want the first part of the story to be here, the second part of the story to be here, and the third part of the story to be here. And I want to distribute the various parts of that story that's been edited by somebody else in different parts of my timeline. I may want to switch the order around for whatever artistic reason and have the end first. The person editing the story doesn't even have to know about that. So I think there's stuff to do with compound clips and versioning that would be quite cool. If you go to a long time ago, like in July 2011, you would have seen me discover there was a thing in Final Cut Pro 10 that wasn't in the front of the user interface, but was hidden inside, referring to things called guards. In other words, there is a guard on this, you can't modify it. And that maybe is Apple's metaphor for this is read-only, or this bin is locked if you look at it from an Avid point of view. So 10.2 would mean multi-user editing. Maybe there'll be another big thing that could happen in terms of integration with motion graphics or sound or photos or Final Cut Pro 10 video editing being available in other apps through extensions. That would say, all right, the good thing about OS 10.0.3 and OS 8.3, and the new Final Cut Pro 10.2 is now, if you've got a sequence that you want to edit in any app that's running on your Mac, then what you're doing is opening up a bit of Final Cut Pro 10 and its various plugins and its various features to make that a video change to, say, for example, a video that's embedded in a keynote presentation. So that's an example of a core mainstream, in theory, reason to give a big update to Final Cut Pro 10 or give it a big version number to say we're doing something seriously different here now. Just like 10.1 was a big change because it was seriously different. It's about how things were organized on the introduction of libraries. So that's why 10.2 might be a new version number, because the intervening versions is marketing. 10 point something is just marketing, or to send the message out that things have changed a lot. Maybe even Premiere people know that 10.1 is a big step up and a big change from a kind of conceptual point of view from Final Cut Pro 10. Maybe the message got out to them that we all thought, oh, we have to learn it all over again, and things change. So that's why you don't need to wait for 10.1.9.9.9.5.9 to come along before you do go to 10.2. 10.2 comes out when there's a next big update or something like that. There's a conceptual change. A bit like, obviously, with OS 10. Sometimes OS 10 went up to, we're in 9.3, I can't remember now, they're all going away. Lots of 10 point something or other, they're all forgetting. So yes, I agree, Ray. That's what I say, Ray, that number sends a message and it comes with expectations. So maybe I want 10.2 to be the next version because I want a big change. And not to be 10.1.5, is that where we're up to? I don't even know, 10.1.6, that's what we're going to be next. And maybe that'll just be a bug fix or a version that works with a huge, fantastic new version of Motion. And the version of Motion is the thing that's going to be the big change. Allows for lots of fantastic plugins for me and my plugin pals. Or maybe just better integration with something else. Who knows? And but as I said in my last broadcast, as I said the last time, hey, if Final Cut Pro 10 is not updated apart from bug fixes for another few months or for a long time, it doesn't matter. People are doing really good stuff with it, and it's really good. We are expecting quite a lot these days in terms of new features all the time, continually being updated. Yeah, and talking of new features, 46.5 months ago or 47 months ago is when Final Cut Pro 10 came out, and it cost $300. And if you do the math, as they say, if you bought it in June 21st, 2011, it's cost you so far is now down to $6.36 a month, which is pretty good value. Yeah, 10.2 as well. It may be updated to 10.2 also, because I would say that the next version that comes out, I just get the impression that the next version that comes out is what Apple kind of planned all along, but they knew they weren't going to get it done for the first version of Final Cut Pro 10, and they thought, well, what can we do with that when it comes out, and what can we do with that here and there and this and that? So 10.2 means, remember iPhone didn't have copy and paste for iOS didn't have copy and paste for a long time. So copy and paste, and they waited until they could do it properly. And you could say that maybe it's the same about multi-user editing in Final Cut Pro 10, that they, it would be a good idea, and that's what they wanted to do when they started working on this. And I would guess late 2008, or maybe mid 2009. Is when I probably thought they probably started Final Cut Pro 10. And that's when companies say we completely rewrote the software, or it took the reason why we don't have a big update is because we're rewriting it from the ground up. I think Final Cut Pro 10 has taken at least, even though it's been around for 3.5, almost 4 years, you can bet it took at least 2 years before that, or maybe 2.5 years, 3 years before that. So Podratic says maybe shake integration for Motion. Well, it's interesting that Apple don't seem to be really into node-based user interfaces. So the technology in Shake, which was in Final Cut Pro 6, I suppose, in terms of pixels coming from nowhere and being interpolated from other pixels in terms of doing super slow motion, And I suppose maybe their tracking software wasn't as good as other people, so they didn't put any tracking in there. It's interesting that another way of looking at it is that Shake. So yeah, somebody says Fusion is going to handle node-based editing on the Mac, or node-based compositing on the Mac, and so that's where the nodes are. I think Apple is specifically limiting motion to stuff that can be done on a GPU, or 7 or 8 things combined together. It ends up being one instruction on a GPU. That's why it's a real-time compositor, much more than other stuff. I mean, I think that's why motion is not a full. It hasn't all got the nodes that that other Apple software used to have that Apple don't sell anymore, or other people do. I don't know. We'll see. To know which direction motion will go in, it's going to be a big clue as to what's going to come up next. In other words, it hasn't changed very much in the last 4 or 5 years, and 5 or 6 years, I would say. I finally actually got my head around it in 2011 when 5 came out, Motion 5 came out. Because before that, I got version 1, and every few months, I would have a go at trying it, and never really got my mind around what the hell it is. And then as soon as I tried to get plugged in there, I got it. Will Premiere Pro continue to borrow from Final Cut Pro 10 the way... Well, I would say that Final Cut Pro 10, Apple don't feel any pressure from anybody else, which is a bit of a pity. I mean, I'd love it if they felt pressure from Premiere or felt pressure from anybody. That would be really good news. But I don't think there's not any sign whatsoever that what anybody else is doing, at least on what is called the Pro end, actually is affecting anything. I don't think so. It would be good if they did, And I think, obviously, I think the Premiere, it's very clever how they've fitted a reasonable amount of modern stuff into Premiere's relatively old metaphor, I mean, I guess Premiere's real competition, if Blackmagic really wanted to do it, is actually, Resolve. And adding enough features to Resolve to make it so it's a real Premiere killer. I don't know. Given the timeline, and given the timeline in Resolve looking like a really cool timeline, looking like Final Cut Pro 10, but having the same kind of metaphor that people are used to from the olden days, from the 20th century, from the old generation. So, who knows what new feature? I mean, essentially, the thing about Blackmagic is they're platform agnostic. So, hey, it's really good that Fusion's going to be out there, and there's going to be a version that does nearly everything for free. There'll be a free version that does all that most people could want, and the paid-for version isn't that much for people who actually use it professionally. But it runs on PCs and Windows and stuff like that, which that's bad news for Apple. So, I would say the only thing Apple really pays attention to in post-production is stuff that's either cross-platform, or that it will tempt people away from Apple hardware because of the margins Apple make on the Mac Pros. Even if they don't make that many, just a few 100,000, I suppose. But still, it's probably a reasonable amount of money. So yeah, cross-platform or PC-only stuff that is attracting people at the high end, and then also in the medium range as well. So that's what Avid does, or Premiere does, or Adobe does. Why would Apple care about that in any way whatsoever? Because to Apple, they represent the old guard, or people who are stuck with their old metaphors, and they probably feel sympathy for us. I imagine, even though it may be misplaced, I'm not saying I totally agree with this. Apple feels sympathy for the technical people at Adobe, and the marketing people. Of course, Final Cut Pro 10 was good news, and it was good news for everybody. But technical folk, now they're catching up in terms of having a proper resolution-independent compositor in Avid, which is really cool. And Adobe, I don't know, what they think. But obviously, the technical people are saying, "Well, we've got a good compositor, and we've got our own." They went for their own, mezzanine, everything to the Mercury engine. So they went a slightly different way. Their solution is everything gets converted to our codec, and our codec has got transparency, and we render everything together, and that's really cool. But what next for Adobe? How many features from one of their other apps are they going to put into Premiere, and how can they make the round tripping better, or certainly the way the titles work? Yeah, Premiere will probably improve the way titles work to make it much more Final Cut Pro 10-ish. They're on the way there, but soon they're really going to go for it, which will make But of course, there's a limit to how much people benefit from that, given the fact that editors chose not to be motion graphics designers. They specifically chose not to do that. As I said before, they chose to be editors, just like motion graphics designers aren't editors. It's a different kind of mindset, even though, of course, I come from that world. So yeah, I mean, the trick is to keep on going to Premiere or talk to people with Premiere, and then see things that are better in it that you can look forward to. They've got tracking, and they've got masks that are better, and they've got the kind of slice X, track X type stuff built into it, which is really cool. So they've got bits of After Effects in Premiere, but I imagine that people, when people are learning Premiere for the first time and see all the possible settings and things you can do, I mean, that's what Chris Fenwick pointed out, is the fact that when Apple show a screenshot of Final Cut Pro 10, they don't show the inspector. They don't show all those settings. They don't think it's actually interesting or compelling to have those settings for clips. I think the idea is to not worry people about the fact that there's lots of other stuff you can do and other settings to have, because then lots of people are worried they actually have to make decisions about all those things. So that's a bit of a clue. Sadly, we have to guess. So, opinion on speed grade. I've only played with it a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think the UI is going to become more Adobe-ish, I imagine, pretty soon. Obviously, it takes like 2 or 3 years to actually fit the rest of the UI of the rest of Creative Cloud. So that will be good. To the extent of what bits of... It's interesting. I mean, watch Adobe. What does Adobe do with Premiere Clip? What do they do with their entry-level editing tools for iOS and for PCs and Macs? What do they do with that? Because that is really where the market and where the mind share and where the changing the world is and stuff like that. So, yeah. So yeah, I've got an iPhone 6 Plus, so I can some subframe edits. Yeah, there is a bit of a problem. So the other question intermediately is tracking in Premiere similar to After Effects. Yes, as far as I know, as far as I can remember, actually, I stopped using After Effects a little bit before I started using the tracking in After Effects, but I will guess probably they're pretty similar, probably the same UI that I can remember. I mean, if you use Slice X or Track X, it's really similar. There's some really cool things about. Yeah, well, watch the tutorial about how effects can track can be tracked to things in Premiere, and just see. There's a couple of features in there that I think you really like. So yes, Aaron Taylor, I'd love a proper timecode window for the timeline, and timecode information is lacking. Timecode is really weird how Apple don't seem to really... It's almost like the attitude seems to be, we hope timecode is not going to be as important to editors anymore. If we just do all the other right metadata stuff, the timecode of something, let's hope it goes away before we have to do it properly, because that's a really old-fashioned way of looking at things. Especially once timelines become multi-frame rate. Yes, multi-frame rate timelines. That'll happen, I think, in a few years' time, in which what will happen is that some action sequences will be at 1 frame rate and the drama sequence will be the other frame rate, because why have the same frame rate for your whole feature film? Because you want different frame rates for different reasons, and of course, that's going to be very hard for something like Premiere or Avid to deal with. Hopefully with their compositing tools, and eventually when After Effects gets a real-time compositor, and then that compositor replaces the one in Premiere, then you'll be able to deal with frame rates that's changing over time. I mean, obviously, that also comes with codecs as well, is the fact you'll have different video elements will have different frame rates depending on what they are. So this pen will have a different frame rate and a different shutter angle than my face, and also the stuff behind me, and they'll be encoded using different codecs and composited in the television. The television will be the compositor, and just all the objects will be sent down the line. Maybe not tomorrow, but maybe soon. Anyway, I'm now kind of rambling and talking random stuff, and as you can tell, I can go... So, the point is, somebody would like proxies and custom folders, please. Yes. I've messed around with pointing proxies to the proxy of motion graphics to its actual real high-resolution self. Yeah. So it is possible if you go inside the library and you make a proxy out of something and you won't make a proxy out of the thing you want in terms of transparency, then you can make it so that it never did get around to documentation. I like the idea of Apple's Proxy workflow is really interesting. It's kind of got to 80% of being completely amazing. So much more than the kind of AMA create new timeline with new media and backwards and forwards that you have to do in Avid. But render in place is pretty cool for Premiere. So that's really cool, and that means you can render a load of stuff and some plugins that somebody else won't have, and as long as they've got that render file, and Adobe look after it. But the problem is that Adobe still does lose things like audio waveforms. It's not just a problem with Final Cut Pro 10, it also happens to Premiere, they just don't appear and stuff like that. So, question, is there a scripting language associated with motion? No, there isn't. Motion produces XML files, that's what it is. So anything can produce motion XML apart from the kind of secret source. But I think there isn't. I like the scripting language that used to be in Final Cut Pro 4, 5, 6, 7. Since Final Cut 1, FX script. I still like. That's what I created my initial plugins with, by modifying Apple's ones and fixing them, and then coming up with new ones. So there's an interpreter. So each frame, a video is playing. The FX script will say, "Okay, FX script, what are you going to draw next? We'll get one more frame. Hey, code, what would you like next?" So that was a scripting language. It was kind of JavaScript-ish. But I think motion is specifically limited, so stuff that will work on a GPU, CPU really well and fast for real-time rendering. And that's why Quartz Composer. The thing about Quartz Composer is that some patches in it are very slow. Some patches are very fast. So Quartz Composer is Apple's node-based compositing tool that's used for creating user interfaces on iOS apps and Mac apps. And it's a developer tool. And it was the original thing that was used in Final Cut Pro, early Final Cut Pro Classic with FX Factory. So FX Factory is about getting that compositing, node-based compositing tool, the free one that comes with Apple developer tools, and making plugins using that. That's what was the old way of FX Factory. But, so loads of these patches, which is what they call nodes in Quartz Composer, nearly all of them were really fast and worked really well on GPUs and CPUs. That means the faster your computer and the faster your video cards were, the better those things would render. But the problem is, some of the node possible patches you can use in Quartz Composer are things like JavaScript. If you've got a node that does JavaScript, and that JavaScript node can have any amount of JavaScript in it, that means you can do anything you do with JavaScript in it. That means you could do loads of calculations. It could take 15 seconds to render a frame, which means rather not very practical for using the plugin, and not very easy for the Mac or the software or Quartz Composer to fix or to make more efficient, or to a general purpose node. But the problem is that if you want to solve a problem and you don't know how to do it using the various nodes you're given in Quartz Composer, just go, I'll just write it in JavaScript, or I'll get some code from somewhere on the internet which is written in JavaScript type language, and I'll just calculate the numbers that way. So Quartz Composer isn't going, but it's not very friendly when it comes to real-time compositing. VJing, it's fantastic, as somebody just said there, in terms of creating your own tools and connections and stuff like that between things, and live inputs in terms of sensors. And so Quartz Composer can create tools that can have lots of different inputs and produce real-time graphics and effects. So it's really cool that way. The problem is, I don't think it's using technology from 2003 and 4. And Apple don't necessarily want to rewrite it for modern operating systems, because there's a few things that just won't work, which means there may be a bit of a Final Cut Pro 7, Final Cut Pro 10 type schism if they do keep. There was that. We're going to call it the same thing, but it'll be kind of different. Only some of the old things will work, and some of the nodes you really learn to rely on won't be able to work anymore, or patches. So anyway, I think there's something there in terms of. Now, all this stuff, by the way, I am given no. Apple has told me nothing. Just to reiterate, this is all guesswork. I'm thinking about it too much when I should be thinking about things that actually matter a bit more. But anyway, all this stuff to do with Apple and the Avid and what's rewriting, I know nothing. That's a reference to Faulty Towers from the 1970s, believe it or not. Anyway, I've been talking for an hour and 4 minutes. Lots of stuff I could have talked about. Talked about some of it, but I think this is enough for now. And maybe you people in Cupertino on the West Coast, it's now just gone 11:30. That means you've got another hour or so, a little work to do before you can take a break for lunch. And time for some afternoon tea in about an hour for you in New York. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, it's now 3:30 in the morning. Anyway, who cares? Not very interesting. See my number going down, down, down. Yes, I'm in London. It is now 25 minutes to 8, at least here. So, anyway, this is what I just was using the world clock on my iPad 2 or something. Anyway, so any last things? Last question, last point, last thing you desperately want me to answer? Like I know anything. Oh, but I'll be able to make up something up plausible. So I'm now looking down, so the outline isn't good, to see if I see any bubbles, any fun bubbles come up before I go. Working with Alex S. Well, no, I'm not working with Alex Snelling at the moment. So we've met up for drinks and chats and keeping up with stuff. But no, despite his mad skills to do with high-end post, he is getting too much work doing training for people in TV companies and stuff like that. And that's too seductive and easy to do as opposed to working... Well, anyway, he should say more about what he's doing. So yeah, we're not working on feature films yet. Also, he's working on a documentary. Was I in Amsterdam last August? Yes, I was at that place, that video trade fair in September, whose name I always forget, but I wasn't there in August, which I might go again. IBC, that's it. I'm an idiot. For some reason, IBC just goes out of my head. And also, I may have work this time next year in Hawaii, which means I won't be able to go to NAB again. Apple HQ meeting. So the question is Apple HQ meeting. I haven't met... I'm not going to... well, I don't think I'm going to go to the Apple thing in June. I can't... It would be quite cool. It'd be amazing, actually, but I don't think I can justify the expense, really. There's an Apple HQ meeting in Amsterdam. I don't know about that. I'm not in with the in crowd at all. Nobody tells me. So the question is, will I be doing these talks frequently? I kind of like the idea of doing it. I think it's kind of to capture lots of stuff that I talk about on Twitter, but I never get around to writing up in a blog post. So maybe I will keep on doing it. I don't think I'll be able to do it every 2 days. And also I'm going to be away next week. So I'll be maybe doing it, but I'm away in the pay to be where I'm going to be. But I did actually get myself a tripod for this thing. So I can easily set this up in different places, which I got big camera tripods, but I don't have actually little. So I've got a Gorilla Pod coming on Amazon. All right, so I'll continue, and next time I'll try and act. Sorry, I just read the word act and just said it. I'll try and respond a bit more to bubbles and things, but I just went off on various sermons and stuff. It might get a bit repetitive, but maybe I'll keep on going. And maybe, who knows? Open to advice, and I'll put this on YouTube later. It might take a little while. I've got to play the whole thing back again. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and tell your friends, and maybe I'll do this again in, I don't know, Friday? Not Monday. Maybe Tuesday, depending on what happens in the world of post-production Final Cut Pro 10. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye. Now what do I do here? Oh, thank you. I'm saying thank you to the buys, and then buys to the thank yous. Thank you to following, and thanks for the hearts. Cool. Maybe it's... Bye.